Okay.
Hi, I'm Preston Williams, and welcome to another edition of Jazz Talk. Today on our show, we are joined by one of the most accomplished musicians in jazz today. This gentleman has been on the scene for over 50 years and has worked with many greats from Marvin Gaye to Stevie Wonder, James Williams, Tony Williams, Art Blakey, Elvin Jones, and Max Roach, to name a few. He is a saxophonist and educator. Please welcome to Jazz Talk, the legendary Mr. Bill Pierce. Welcome, sir.
I love that. Legendary. Yeah. I guess at my age, I'm legendary. Yes.
Hey man, let's get into this, and thank you so much for being on Jazz Talk
Sure,
today.
sure.
You know, when I was researching and looking up information on you, I understand that you were born in Hampton, Virginia, but you grew up in Florida.
Yes, my mom and dad both attended Hampton. My dad was a GI and was on at Hampton on the GI Bill. So my mother graduated before him. But by then I was, I was either born or about to be born. And so they stayed in Hampton while, where my father finished up his degree. And then they both luckily, I think they actually worked in Prince Edward, Prince George, Prince Ed, one of those counties who they told me some pretty interesting stories about it back in those days in 49.
I can imagine.
Yeah, it was kind of rough. And then they both got a pretty good job in Florida. I think my dad went to a place called Pheasanton Academy, which was one of the few Black private schools in America.
Yeah.
And it's still there, but as an institute or as a museum for that particular institution and for institutions like that. There were about two or three of them. I remember there was a private school, like a military school, maybe in Georgia somewhere, and maybe one other one. But my dad went to Pheasanton and he worked there. And then they basically ended up teaching in Florida for the rest of my young life. So I grew up in Florida, but I was born in Virginia.
Yeah. And the fact that your parents were educators, was that what you would call, Bill, was the starting catalyst for you to get involved in music? Because I guess you started playing saxophone. Was your parents instrumental in you playing saxophone? Or
Well, I mean, they didn't object. My mother was actually sort of a stage mother in the sense that she wanted to be an entertainer. But because of her family, no, you're not going to do that. You're not going to go to Hampton and get a degree and be a singer. I mean, that was their thinking. And but she was a singer and a dancer, for local shows whenever that. She went to a place called Avery Institute in Charleston, which is a very significant educational place for Black folks. Okay. And so anyway, she finished, and her dreams of being an entertainer didn't quite happen, but she was very receptive to me doing something. I mean, she used to make me sing all the time, and I was a terrible singer, but I sang anyway. And then when the little school I was attending in the country in Florida, started a band program, I was first one at the table. I was second one because the first guy got the alto, and that's what I wanted, and so I got the tenor.
Okay.
Like
Great. And were you playing in like any local bands during that time when you were in high school?
No, well, the school I went to, man, it was pretty rural. I mean, it was, my folks had a house when they were still together. They had a house in Jacksonville, but my mother worked in this really small country town. I say country town, but I mean, it was, but it was just a small town in Florida. And I was too young, and there wasn't any scene. Like, there was a couple of juke joints or nightclubs or night spots, but I mean, there was nobody else playing musical instruments per se, except the kids in the band program and some of the old folkloric kind of guys who would either play harmonica or guitar on the porch every now and then. But it wasn't any scene. It was way too small of a town for a scene. Yeah. And but people, I remember hearing people playing like the washtub bass and the bass drum and the thing, the scratcher in sanctified churches and stuff. But I didn't go to that. I mean, that was my particular, religious background. But we used to love it because, man, they could really cook, man, and they could really hit, but it was no scene. But I was driven, I don't know why. I guess I just was. It just was natural to me. So I mean, I kind of fixed up some drums, hooked up on a chair, like marching band drums on a chair, and I would tell the drummer what to do. Man, yeah, do this, do I, no idea what I was doing. Yeah. And we would play. I remember we played Watermelon Man. So it was me, a trombone player, and this drummer with all this contraptions of drums, and we could play. We learned Watermelon Man because another high school from a bigger town in Florida, they played an arrangement of it. When I heard it, I could pull it off to some degree. I don't know how. Man, I would actually like to hear that, but anyway, so I did that. But I didn't really get a formal education in music other than marching band and concert band until I moved to finish up my high school education in Miami. And then the world opened up to me because they had an orchestra and a jazz band and a marching band and everything. So, man, that was just like, wow, I was in heaven.
Fantastic. And then you eventually made the move, to Boston and attended Berkeley.
Yeah, I went to Tennessee State first, so.
And I understand, getting back, just thinking about Berkeley, during that time period, I guess you were gigging or playing. You played at some place called the Sugar Shack. Tell me about that.
Sugar Shack was a joint. The Sugar Shack was like, are you from Washington or Baltimore?
I'm 15, 20 minutes from Baltimore. I'm in Columbia, Maryland.
Sure, that's where my cousin lives, yeah. Like the Howard Theater, every major city in America had at least one Black theater. Mm-hmm. So, what did you ask me?
We're talking about the Sugar Shack.
Oh yeah, the Sugar Shack. So in Boston, because Boston didn't have they had Black clubs, they didn't have like a theater. So the main club that had national acts was called the Sugar Shack, and that's where I started working on my professionalism. I mean, I had played in the juke joints around Roxbury and Boston, just in R&B bands and blues bands. But I started working at the Sugar Shack. We were backing up all the Motown acts. So that's how I got my connection with Stevie and Motown, because all the Motown acts, that was the place they played in Boston.
Man, what was it like working with guys like him and Marvin Gaye early, in your career before you?
Well, let me clarify something. That's been a misprint for a while. I didn't work with Marvin Gaye. I worked with the Four Tops. I worked with the Dells. I worked with just about every other act that Marvin Gaye. But somehow it was noted on an old bio that I worked with Marvin. But to be honest, I didn't work with Marvin. But I mean, just about everybody else. It was Martha Reed and the Vandellas, a lot. And then Stevie was the turning point, because when we worked with Stevie, he played at the Sugar Shack every year, at least once or twice. And then sometimes they would do like little location hits around New England. They'd go up to Maine and Vermont and stuff like that. So, and they always traveled with horn sections, rhythm sections, but no horns, because, financially they couldn't do that, or they didn't want to do that, put it that way. And so we got called to back up Stevie doing a couple of New England hits, like, up in New Hampshire or Maine. And then when Stevie decided that, well, I don't want to do this anymore, I want to have a self-contained band, that's how it happened. And he said, I like those young, because we were young guys, maybe younger than some of the other places. We were college age guys. And the music director and the guy named Gene Key, they were really saying, yeah, let's get those guys from Boston. And so they got 5 horn players from Boston. And man, that was kind of the beginning of my real professional career.
Yeah. So during the 70s, you became a faculty member at Berkeley.
Yeah. After I did a lot of other stuff, I did a lot of weird stuff, man. After Stevie, I played in the All-American Vaudeville Review, and that was quite strange. And I just started jobbing around Boston, and I had little things here and there. I played with Max Roach once, just subbing, and because he was out in Western Mass. And so I was getting little things here and there, but, after doing some of these stranger road gigs, I decided, yeah, man, teaching can't be this bad. So, because I didn't want to be a teacher, right? Because everybody in my family are teachers, and that was a part of it. I said, I don't want to do that. I mean, I want to do something. I want to be a musician. Yeah. But when the job opportunity came, I said, well, let me see what it's like. And actually, over a period of time, education was just as significant to me as anything else I did, because, you see that you have a positive you have a positivity for young people, and you get to meet young people, and you actually, teaching yourself a lot more about what you're trying to do, because you have to explain it to people. And by doing that, you teach yourself all over again, at least to a certain degree, in terms of procedures and methodology and stuff like that. So it was a good thing. Gave me some steady work. I was able to support my wife and myself, and then I was a part-time teacher until I got the call to go with Art Blakey. But in the meantime, around Boston, I started doing some pretty good gigs. I played with Alan Dawson, and I would sometimes get a call to play with different guys. Art Farmer down at the Jazz Workshop, and different people through James Williams and through Alan Dawson, because I met James, and then James hooked me up with Alan, and then I started getting stuff, and then so
that's beautiful. That's
beautiful.
19,
yeah, 5 years. 5 years of just jobbing around Boston. I guess 75 through 80, something like that.
75 through 80. So was James instrumental in helping you get the gig with Art?
Unbelievably instrumental. He was a catalyst for my career, and a lot of other people too. Jay, you know how, in the world of music, it gets tough, and sometimes you say, man, why am I doing this? I'm not getting anywhere, not professionally. And or if you had those thoughts, and if you articulated them to James, man, he would just go off on you and tell you, man, oh man, things like, man, the world needs you, and like, the world needs me.
Right.
It seems so bizarre. I was so out of character, out of reality. But James actually really felt that, and he was like that with me, with Bill Easley, Bill Mobley, all the three Bills, John Brown, Mulgrew Miller. All the people in James's sphere of influence. If you ever had a moment of doubt, and you were part of James's nucleus of friends and associates, man, he was a born preacher, but he preached the gospel of music and of jazz. So he wouldn't let us give up on ourselves, even if sometimes we thought about it. And so that was the case with James. I mean, I started working, doing gigs around Boston a lot. And when James got the call with Art Blakey, I was happy for him, but I didn't think about myself ever doing something like that. Yeah. And then he called me up and said, well, look, man, there's going to be a change. You need to come on down to New York, and do what you got to do. And so I did, and I got the job. Yeah.
Wow. Now you ended up being the musical director from that for that group. What was it like? Would you say, Bill, you were nervous initially working with a giant like him?
Oh, of course, unbelievably, because I was a music director at the last of my tenure, the last 6 to 8 months. That's when I was music director, because before it was kind of shared between Bobby Watson and James. It was kind of Bobby, but James a little bit too. And then when that changed up, when Wynton got in the band, then Wynton got that particular position. It was unofficial anyway. Yeah. But I mean, you were you were responsible. If things didn't go well, Art would yell at you. But and then every night he would slip you a little money, so it was kind of cool to get another little taste. But it was very good for me, because I learned how to try to deal with people who were very talented, and then one guy who was legendary. So I mean, I would you'd go into Art, and Art said, what you got? And he was asking about the set list, and you tell him, and he would sometimes make corrections, but usually he just, whatever you decided, he'd let you do. But it was interesting having the different music directors, because you were a music director in the sense that, you called the sets, but generally if Art had something in mind that he really wanted to do, because he could read the audience like nobody could. I mean, he knew when it was time to pull out one of the War Horses or a Blues March or Moanin' or something like that. When he just knew how to read an audience, and that's a skill that he kind of instilled in us. Wynton, Bobby, James, Fambro, all of us. He didn't sit down and give you like step one, step. Just by doing it and having Art talk to you, yell at you, curse you out, you kind of learned, you learn how to do it. You learn how to do it, and you learn how to and it was interesting in the messengers, at least when I was in the band, you know, guys would get like accolades. Hey man, that was a good set you called. You know, that was like a big achievement. That was like if you paced a set, there was a smoking set, and you could feel that the audience loved it or liked it or was very enthusiastic about it. Man, the guys in the band, man, would be like, that was happening. And they wouldn't say anything called a sorry set, but Art would tell you. But that was one of the interesting kind of a side realities or side instructions that you got without even knowing it. You learn how to call a set, and that's like something I don't know a lot of young people even think about that, because and I'm talking about jazz guys. I guess they do. You have to. I mean, but it's not the thing you first think about. You think about it after you've done it enough times and it sucked, or if it didn't work. You have to start thinking about that. Well, how do we make this? Most of us, not everybody, but how can I make this better so I can engage the audience? And because when the audience is with you, it makes the gig so much better. I mean, of course, but it may not be something that you think about initially, but once you start having to do that, then you start realizing, and well, here's something I need to learn how to do. And it's an art and a skill within itself. Most of the old guys, they know how to do it, but through experience, you know.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, Bill, I heard some story, you can correct me if I'm wrong, about Art Blakey always, let's just say, having the musicians sort of be on, what's the word I'm looking for? Like he's always rehearsing new musicians to take your job or something like that?
Not really. No, that's not really true. I mean, but I think since you were getting complacent, then he would actually maybe kind of ask around a little bit, just to ask somebody to come up there and sit in.
Yeah.
Maybe put a little fear in you, but that wasn't really a thing he went out to do necessarily and specifically, but something to that effect was always there, you know. And a lot of times he would just do that to scare you or to make you be a little bit more cognizant of that, this ain't your job, this ain't your band, this is my band. So that was always something like that there, but he always let guys sit in. Mm-hmm. Or he would put that on us, because sometimes we would have rehearsals and he would invite guys and they would show up. And as soon as guys, if they weren't really happening, I could see Art would reach behind his ear and turn off his hearing aid, and he didn't want to hear it. And then sometimes he'd get up the bandstand and just walk away. We're there dealing with these people. And, and there would be, a couple of guys who were very enthusiastic, very young, and kind of green, and they were like asking, well, what next? And I said, what next? This is it. You've done what you're supposed to do. See ya. But it was kind of like that. And sometimes when Art used to always tell us, this ain't the post office, so don't get too comfortable being here. Yeah. That was a direct quote from Art Blakey. This ain't the post office, you know.
Yeah, you got the voice down pat.
Which meant that, don't get so comfortable that you think this is a job for perpetuity. It's not. Because if I find somebody else I like better, you may be gone.
Wow. Hey, let me ask you, Bill, what would you say, working with a giant like that, what would you say, what's your biggest takeaway working with Art Blakey? What do you think you learned most from working with someone of this caliber?
Some stuff I just talked about, absolute professionalism, and the idea that you're not, it's special to be a jazz musician and to be a musician, but you're not that special. So, in the sense that, you're nothing without an audience. So that's kind of one of the things that you play to the highest level of your ability, and the music you play has the highest demand. He always said it's the highest level performance on any musical instrument, and he truly believed that. But I kind of get carried away. But it was It was that. It was that. Well, and that the bandstand is to be respected. The music is to be respected. The brothers, the people before you, for the most part, are to be respected and revered. But you're supposed to carve out your own niche. But the bandstand is sacred. The bandstand is sacred. You don't get up on the bandstand and act like a fool, an idiot, and take and insult the audience in your behavior. It was basically professionalism in the highest level, and that's kind of the way I see it. I mean, I learned a lot from playing at the Sugar Shack, but it was nothing like having to, kind of measure up to the demands of an Art Blakey. And from that, I played with Freddie Hubbard and Tony. I'd already played with Alan Dawson, and that was the first kind of introduction to when you play with a master, how your decorum and your professionalism. You can't be, you don't stand up with your hands in your pockets. Remember one night I was scratching my head, man, and Freddie Hubbard cursed me out. Man, don't scratch your head on my bandstand. I mean, he went off on me. I was like, my head itched. What was I supposed to do? He laid me out. Guys, I mean, and he got that from art, or guys like art. There's a certain criteria decorum, and how you handled yourself and how you presented yourself. I mean, even now today, well, at least when I was still in education, I'd have these ensembles and we'd have to do concerts at the school, or sometimes we'd play in other venues. And, guys are standing with their hands in their pocket. I'm like, man, you guys look like y'all just fell off the damn bean truck or something. You're a musician, man. You're supposed to, you're a jazz musician. You're supposed to exude a certain, suaveness and coolness and professionalism. Scratching your head, no, your hands in your pocket, man, and like looking like you're half asleep and you're not sure you want to be there. That kind of stuff. Nah, man, that's not it, man. And I know that's probably a pretty old criteria or old standard of behavior or older, but it still works for me. It's just, all that stuff I basically learned with art. And when I played with Tony longer than I played with Art Blakey. And I played even longer with Kevin Eubanks. That was my last, well, really, that was like 15, 16 years. Yeah. And it changed a bit, but not the core values that art instilled in Kevin Eubanks and myself. We still carried with us, man. You're not playing for yourself. You're playing for the people who paid money to come and listen to you. It doesn't mean you have to play down to people, but you can't set yourself above the audience or take them for granted. So that's a big part of it for me anyway. Yeah. And I still feel that way.
That's wonderful, man. Another great musician you played with, one of my favorite musicians. What was it like working with Elvin Jones?
Well, I didn't play with Elvin a lot. I played with Elvin about 2 or 3 times. Okay. And I was not a regular member of Elvin's bands at any time. But, I was always in awe just being, in the bandstand with him and being, in this presence. I mean, it was, I didn't have a long-term relation with Elvin. I would have liked to have had one, but that didn't happen for me. But I played with him. Once we played a tribute to Art Blakey that Elvin played. Elvin played drums, and then we did Carl Allen had put together like a big band thing in Japan, and Elvin was on it. Elvin and Carl and a Japanese drummer whose gig it really was with George Kawaguchi. So it's just interesting to see that, man, because all the musicians the show would open up with everybody playing at once, and then to hear these different guys. I think it was Ron Carter, Rufus Reed, and a Japanese bass player. So you could really hear when these guys would get their little solo feature or their spot, in this, and when the opening performance and everybody played at once. It was interesting to hear that. It was quite interesting, actually. And Elvin was the most, he was the most, I don't want to say exotic, that's not the right word, but I remember, man, because it was a big, real famous Japanese big band called the Sharps and the Flats.
Mm-hmm.
And so the director was like directing the band. And so there would be a break where each drummer would get a chance to, do their like 4 bars or 8 bars. And when Elvin would do it, man, the Japanese band director of the big band would just be like, Elvin would lose everybody every time, man. Elvin knew where he was.
Yeah.
He'd do that circular thing, man. And the guy would be waving, man, trying to find the beat. and I think Elvin would do it on purpose. So he couldn't find it.
Man, that's hilarious.
It was hilarious, man.
Oh boy. And you also played with the great drummer Roy Haynes. What was it like working with Roy?
Oh yeah, well, wonderful, man. He's a Boston guy, and I knew his brother fairly well. Vinny Haynes was just the sweetest man. And he was I told Vinny, I said, Vinny, I was in New York, man, and I saw like down at Bryant Park, man, I saw your brother and Elvin Jones, they had a split bill. Say, man, your brother was playing his ass off. And he said, yeah, the kid's gonna be okay. This was like, this was like in the 80s or the 90s. Yeah. So the way he said that was so funny. And when I did that recording with Roy Haynes and Hank Jones, I was in the studio. It was my session. James and the Francois Zalacan put it together. And when I got in the session, and because I said, well, James, what are we going to do here, man? I didn't write any tunes. He said, we're just gonna play tunes, just so it's kind of a tribute to the recording of Lester Young, Buddy Rich, and Nat King Cole, that recording. I said, oh, okay. And once I got in the studio, I looked at those 2 guys and I said, wait a minute, those guys recorded and played with Charlie Parker. I'm like, why am I here? It freaked me out there for a minute. I finally pulled myself together and started saying, well, I got to take care of whatever business I can take care of. I better start taking care of it. But it was such nice. And actually after that recording, Hank Jones asked me to join his band, but it was the same time that Tony Williams asked me to join his band. So I kind of opted for Tony,
And I was about to ask you about Tony, who's my favorite drummer, one of my favorite musicians. Mm-hmm. And sorry to believe it's over 25 years he's been gone, but what was it like working with him, man? What did you learn? Because, Tony had a very short, but really intense career, from the time he played with Miles, Lifetime and his own little groups. But what was it like working with Tony, Bill?
I pretty much described Tony, short, short and intense. Yeah. No, he was a great guy, man. Tony and I got along quite well, man. He's another Boston guy. And once I realized that, well, it looks like I'm going to have the gig, I wasn't that sure the first few gigs, see if this is going to last for me or not. And then once I realized I was going to be in the band for a while, I got comfortable and I started really playing Tony's music better. He was a very demanding guy musically. He was a funny guy. I mean, a lot of people don't get that from the Tony they may have had to deal with, especially if they're dealing with him on the business level. Yeah. But he was a character. He was a funny guy. And but one thing about him, music was the heart and soul of who he was, and the drums was the heart and soul of who he was. Mm-hmm. So when it was time to play the drums and time to play his music, it's serious time now. You need to kind of throw down. Although sometimes, man, this guy he was so crazy that he would play sometimes, and Wallace Roney would say, "Hey man, check out Tony." I said, "What was he doing?" He said, "Yeah, he's doing this Philly Joe thing over there. Look, he'd go playing all Philly Joe's licks, and then sometimes he did Art Blakey licks. He could do all of his heroes. He could emulate to a T." And he would sometimes do that when he felt, like loose and having a good time. He would just start playing like some Philly Joe stuff from some Miles Davis records, right as we were doing the gig. So it was really something, man. It was probably a musical experience that I could never imagine I would have, and it was like really the highest level of performance for me. because it was so demanding. You wanted to make sure your shit was correct.
Right.
Otherwise, even more so than Art Blakey. Art Blakey could be kind of passive sometimes when he cursed out, but not Tony.
Yeah. That was the first time I met you, Bill. It was November 1991. You guys were at Blues Alley.
Yeah.
And I went around and met all you guys. You were just chilling, man. You were leaning up against the bar. I said, "Hey, man, what's up?" He said, "How you doing?" You were
I was probably tired.
But yeah, that was a fantastic set. And I remember talking to Tony, and it was November. And I said, "You guys working on anything?" He says, "April of next year, the story of Neptune." He said, "That's coming out."
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah, we were chatting about that.
Yeah, he already had it in it. Yeah, he was a very organized guy, and he took, I mean, it was nothing. He didn't have to practice the drums anymore. I think every now and then he may have practiced. I'm not going to even comment on that. Right. But that was second nature to him to play the drums. But he was very serious about when he went into the composing mode, yes, like a project. He just isolated himself and he just wrote, and he checked it out, and he was friends with enough guys where he could really, get it checked out before he actually even played it. And a lot of things that we played was, for other recording projects that he had. Sometimes we never even played things, but except on the records.
Yeah.
He was wise about that, because Miles did the same thing. There's a lot of great Miles tunes that we all love from that quintet, but they never played those songs in clubs or in live performances. They were like studio things. They were either they didn't lend themselves to the live audience experience, or for Miles, he just didn't like them. And maybe for Tony, he just didn't feel like it was appropriate. I don't know.
Yeah, Bill, I like what he was doing compositionally. He was really developing it. And that recording he did, Wilderness, I thought that was beautiful, man. One of his very best. I think you were on his very last recording, weren't you?
Not Wilderness, but probably the last one he did for Blue Note.
Yeah, I think, that was that Tokyo one, I believe.
Tokyo Live.
Yeah,
that might have been after Wilderness. He had already had Wilderness in the can. And because that probably was at the end of the summer. I don't know the specific dates, because that was kind of sad, man. Mulgrew,
I know,
called me up and said, he called me up and said, "Hey, man, Tony wants to speak to you," because, the band had disbanded. And I was like, "Oh, yeah, man, I'd like to speak to him. I haven't talked to him." And I couldn't get through, and, because he was passing.
Yeah.
And because he had told me, tell Pierce to call me, man. And then, a couple of years later, man, I'm the only guy left from the original band.
Yeah, man. Definitely.
Shawnette passed.
That's right, last year.
So, but Ira came on, was the third bass player. So Ira and I, the last of that particular period of Tony's performing life. Me and Ira, everybody else was gone. Even the road manager passed away.
Wow. That's amazing. I was going to ask you about music, what you're listening to. Like, if I were to just come over and hang out with you right now at your house, what is Bill Pierce listening to right now? Who are you checking out these days?
Man, I don't listen to music that much every now and then.
Really?
And when but I tend to, I listen to Paul Gonzalez with Duke Ellington. I listen to a lot of the older musicians that I didn't spend enough time listening to. And there's still a lot of things about, well, man, what was so great about this guy, whoever it could be. And then so I go and check and I say, oh yeah, now I get it. So I tend to do more kind of research listening and music I just really like. There are some things that I never, if I hear it like on the radio, I do most of the stuff randomly on the radio, so I don't have to pick it myself. And so, man, even if I hear like Miles 1963, where Tony was first in the band, I hear that and they're, oh man, and I'll be listening to that for a while, a couple of months, because it just, man, when I heard it back then, I heard it with youthful ears. Yeah. And now when I listen to it, I hear it with a mature musician sensibility and what I want and expect of music and what I like in music. So that's kind of where I'm at a lot. And I listen to a lot of things, and I don't listen necessarily jazz. I mean, I like classical music. I mean, I have a degree. It wasn't in classical music, but I had to take a lot of those courses. But and that was the other thing about Tony. Tony knew more about classical music than I did, and I had a degree, and Tony didn't. But uh, there's just so much great music. So once I'm exposed to something that I was not familiar with, or if I think of something, or a person says, you know, man, I haven't been. There were times when if I listen to one Bird record, then I have to listen to Bird for months. Same thing with Sonny Rollins, and of course with Train. You know, I had to make myself stop listening to Train a long time ago, because that's all I wanted to listen to. And I said, man, you know, as much as I love Coltrane, there's other stuff in music that will probably be beneficial to me to listen to. But those three guys, Bird, Sonny Rollins, and Coltrane. But then you can add George Coleman, Wayne Shorter. I mean, I'm just talking about saxophone players. Wayne, you know,
Joe Henderson.
Oh yeah, well, I went to a big Joe Henderson period. That's back when I first met James. We were playing all of his tunes. I was trying to emulate a little. I loved, man, but I loved all the cats.
Those guys are great. You know, I have that same thing too, Bill. Sometimes I get on this thing and I've been listening to Bud Powell straight.
Oh, now
I can't get away from Bud. Wait, crazy, man.
I used to get on my students. I said, man, who do you listen to? Especially if they're in our Blakey ensemble, and they would call off names. It says, wait a minute. I mean, do you listen to Bud Powell? I mean, because that's where, you know, the people that came to Art's band, they came out of him. Bobby Timmons, Cedar Walton, and all these people, they came out of that sensibility, man. You got to go back. And so I used to get on their case about it. And it says, you know, people say, well, I'm not going to call any names, but nah, man. I mean, if you're going to play this music, you got to listen to the people who could really play it and try to figure out what they were doing, because they could really play it. And you got to go to the source.
That's right. I was reading something somewhere. I think McCoy Tyner, Herbie Hancock, Bill Evans, even Bird, and even Monk said Bud Powell. That's you know, it's just about his genius, man.
And I'm still, I don't know Lester as well as I should, but sometimes when I hear the real, the essential solos, I said, yeah, that's it right there. You know, I mean, oh man, well, that trio record with Buddy Rich and Nat King Cole was always a classic. But a lot of those really great Count Basie solos, the ones he played with Count Basie, like, yeah, man, he doesn't get much better than that, man. You know, and you know, I mean, jazz is just, I don't know, it's my life. It's a big portion of my life. And it started when I was like just a kid in a country town in Florida, not knowing anything about anything. But when I heard it, I said, oh man, there's something about this that resonated in my soul. And to this day it does. People, why don't you listen to this? Man, I ain't listened to enough jazz yet. You know, so I haven't really done all the listening in jazz that I need to do, so I don't need to listen to some of it. And I listen to R&B and pop, and I enjoyed playing with Stevie Wonder when I was with him. But you know, it was what it was, and I'm not denigrating the music or anything, because it's a soundtrack to most of our young lives. But if you ask me about what really makes my soul feel complete, is I have to listen to jazz. Jazz, yes, sir. You know.
Yes, sir. Well, listen, Bill, I wanted to spend this next 5 minutes or so. This is the last segment we're going to do.
Okay.
We're going to do a word association game. I'm going to name an artist. Just say the first thing that comes to your mind. There's no right or wrong answer.
Oh.
Throughout your illustrious career, we're going to go through some. First name, Stevie Wonder.
Oh, genius, I think. I think genius. He surprised me so many times, a couple of times in particular, where we would just be warming up and he would start jamming on on of all things Caravan, because that was a feature for him on a harmonica, and sometimes he would be like, whoa, you know. Yeah, he was a genius. He was.
Next name, James Williams.
Oh man, it's kind of hard to say anything, you know. So I was talking to Bill Easley today, and every time I talk to any of the guys from that group, I was a Saint Williams.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to put it. Next name, Max Roach.
Ooh, Mr. Intimidation. My brief encounter with Max, but he was always really cool with me from that time on. I ended up subbing for him, and we did a rehearsal in this trumpet player's apartment, Stanton Davis, and Max came with a snare drum and brushes. I had never heard then, and maybe up to even now, so much drums coming out of brushes and the snare. He just wiped us, man. He was so bad, man. Unbelievable, man, this guy. But very intense, demanding man. Nobody to trifle with.
Yeah.
On any level.
Next name, Art Blakey.
Oh, man. He's like a crazy uncle I'm glad I had. You know, he was a true jazz character. He was an angel and the devil. He was everything. He was the yin and the yang. He encompassed everything in human nature and in music. And man, I was blessed to spend some time around him, and a couple of times hanging out with him, just him and I, when he really kind of talked really deeply from his heart. At least it sure felt like that, because he was also one of the great liars and the great bullshitters in the world. But he's also was an ultra realist. When he was time for him to be real, he was everything. He encompassed everything in human nature to the maximum. You know, man, I was blessed to spend some time around that man.
Next name, Freddie Hubbard.
Oh, Mr. Fun. He's quite a character, man. I was so kind of shocked that he asked me to join his band. I mean, I just left Arts Band when he asked me to do it, and even more shocked when he actually sent me a plane ticket. And he was just a brilliant, brilliant musician. I mean, truly brilliant, truly crazy, but truly brilliant, man. He could play more trumpet than anybody I've heard yet. And he could also sit down and play the trumpet. And play the piano almost as well as he could play the trumpet. And he was an interesting guy, to say the very least. But man, he always treated me like a friend, and that was a high honor for me, man. Everybody said, "Man, where's Pierce?" He would ask me. So, "Oh man, he's around some. Oh man, I need to see that guy." And he just talked shit, man. But he was, man, intense guy. But like I said, Mr. Fun. He was a wide in all things. Man, unbelievable, man.
And last name, Tony Williams.
Yeah, you could almost say a lot of those things that I've said about all the people that have preceded, man. But when I was a kid, when I heard Tony Williams, and I must have been, he's only a few years older than me. So I was like, man, who the hell is this guy? I read about it in Downbeat, and I was still in high school, like in 9th or 10th grade. And he was my idol, and I'm not a drummer, but just, it was something in the way he played and how he played. And this album, Ego, I remember I listened to that over and over and over and over again for a long period of time. And it wasn't a style of music that I particularly wanted to play myself, but it seemed perfect. Perfect for Tony. It was perfect to have that band, with Joe Chambers. Well, Joe Chambers wasn't on the record, but I used to see the band, and Joe used to play percussion. Joe Chambers, Junie Booth, Larry Young, and Tony. That was, boy, that man, and I'm blessed. I know I'm blessed because all these people you mentioned to me, I've had some sort of relationship with, and for a kid from a town, or from a town that the county was only about 10,000 people, until I moved to Miami. That's a long journey. I mean, that's a wide chasm to cross, but I did it. And it wasn't so much of me, but I guess it was my destiny. I don't know. I can't say, but I got to be around my heroes. I mean, my absolute heroes. So what can I say?
It's funny, Bill. Just one more thing, real quick. you know, the Tony record that seems to get everyone talking. Of course, 7 Steps to Heaven, but I've heard countless musicians say 4 and More. When they heard that,
Ooh,
that Tony was kicking on that one.
Well, man, the guy's concept, nobody had that before him.
Right.
I mean, they said, well, you know, he played a lot like Roy Haynes. Yeah, he did. He did. But it was not only just how he played and what he played, but the concept, how it fit in musically with everything. I mean, you know, about every name you asked me, I could consider a genius, but I would probably put Tony maybe at the highest, you know, level of genius. Because, and for one thing, because he was so driven. You know, he was driven to be any and everything he was driven to be that way. And he you know, you couldn't bullshit Tony Williams.
Yeah. You know, Max Roach said Tony was one of the few, as far as the drums concerned. He said he was one of the few to conquer the 4-legged monster. That's what Max said about Tony.
And Tony had nothing but absolute respect for Max. Yeah. They were very close.
Yeah, beautiful. Man, listen, I want to thank you, Bill, so much for being on Jazz Talk today. It's been a pleasure just to share this time and talk about your illustrious career and just some of the great musicians you've worked with. Hang on, I'm about to close out the show.
Sure.
Well, you've heard it from the great Bill Pierce. And as the saying goes, if the music grooves and makes you move, it must be jazz. I'm Preston Williams with Jazz Talk signing off. Peace.
Peace, brother.